Hey, everybody, and welcome to Vancouver Overcast with Mike Klassen, episode 15. On this very special edition of the pod, we've brought together several good friends for what has become formerly known as the Wine Roundtable. As listeners will discover as I introduce them, each of our four guests have strong involvement in British Columbia's dynamic wine scene. So without further ado, they are Harry Hercheg. Harry is the executive director of the Vancouver International Wine Festival. Harry has led North America's largest wine conference for most of the past 2 decades. After a record-setting year in February 2020, the festival's future was shaped by the pandemic, requiring a new date and a new approach to this popular gathering that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the podcast. Harry is an old friend from our time together at college radio station CITR at UBC, the mighty R, and a well-known figure in the BC wine scene. Karen Graham. Karen is in the Okanagan and based in the Okanagan, and she's the founder of Wine Drops, a website where she puts her expertise as a senior public policy analyst to work discussing the Canadian wine sector's potential and key milestones. Her writing has also been featured in the Globe and Mail. Karen is also vice chair of the Vancouver International Wine Festival Board of Directors. Mark Hicken. Mark is a lawyer now retired from law practice who has long served the wine and beverages industry. Mark led an industry review on behalf of the provincial government here in BC, resulting in the widely praised Hicken Report recommendations. Mark has begun a new venture called Through the Grapevine Advisors, TTGV, in partnership with our next guest, who is Tanya Tomaszewska. Tanya is a former banking and finance lawyer who found her calling in the wine sector as an independent wine advisor to individuals and corporations. She brings on-the-ground experience from our province's wine region and is lately the most seasoned wine traveler here on the podcast today. After many trips to the BC Interior region, Tanya works alongside Mark at TTGV Advisors, providing advice on winery operations and acquisitions. So we're recording today on another diabolically terrible atmospheric river weather days here in Vancouver. Wine is ultimately about farming, and the weather was one of the big stories of the year. So I'd like to maybe kick off today's talk about some reflections on vintage 2021. Maybe I'll go to you, Tanya. You were out there speaking to winemakers and wine proprietors. What's your takeaway from what you saw this year in BC wine country?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for getting us together. 2021 was affected largely by extreme weather events, which you've mentioned. Looking back at 2020, when COVID first came down onto the industry, that was a year largely about stabilizing in a milieu of the unknown, setting up reservation systems, getting prepared to reopen. And then once people were able to do it and the infrastructure was set up, for the most part, it was a consistent season in terms of wine travelers and wine buyers. 2021 was coming off the back of, for lack of better words, that kind of stabilization. So we had a new foundation of that infrastructure for wine travel and for the consumers. But then what we had were things like the heat dome. We had fires, we had travel advisories, we had stop and start, we had open and close. And all of this was quite tumultuous for winery business, as I feel throughout, the Okanagan in particular. Everything from, could they rely on visitors coming to their cellar doors, because a large consequence of 2020 was the rise of cellar door sales in direct to consumer and wine clubs. So this kind of stop and start had a big effect. Hospitality industry generally, with things like the heat dome, restaurants had to close. It was 50 degrees in kitchens. It was unsafe for kitchen staff to be working. And then the evacuations with the fires. So you had large groups of people in the valley that had to, Okanagan Valley, the South Okanagan Valley, that had to be moved. A lot of staff left. They had nowhere to go. So, the hospitality and the wine industry during the season relies heavily on out of province and foreign workers. And you could feel that pressure of the shortness of staff. So that's a long-winded answer, I know, but on the ground from a consumer wine travel perspective, that's what was happening, and the effects, the intensity of that on winery business operators and their teams, I felt was immense. I felt it was much more intense and challenging than 2020 in broad terms.
Yeah. And yet it's still, the people are still there. They're still producing great wine. Lots of people came,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely. And the passion is there, and all that doom and gloom in my last few minutes is all that to say is and Karen, who's on the ground and lives there, will have thoughts on this, but the perseverance and the grit, and if anything, people in the wine industry are passionate about what they're doing, whether they're makers or owners or visitors. And I saw that on the ground when I spent time there. People did what they could. Everyone was helping each other out. Owners, winemakers, everyone hands on deck. And you really, really saw that. And then, back to the weather, although we had the heat dome and the fires, right now, the general assessment is because of the bit of spike of heat we did have earlier in the year, and then some consistent growing time, we have nice quality of fruit. Smaller, lower volumes, but people expect that the quality is very high. So there were some good things coming out of this year. I don't want to sound like it was all bad, but it was just more of a comparison of what I saw in 2020 compared to 2021 as an overall vintage.
Karen, we're the kids on the coast right now, so you've got that experience of living in the Okanagan. You see it, you've seen all the ups and downs yourself up close. We had together a really wonderful time, and we went to Bello Winery in Narameta Bench, and listening to Wendy Rose talk about the passion they have for the food, the terroir, everything. I mean, there are some really positive and wonderful experiences that people who go there are going to take in. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you saw from the perspective of living there.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I mean, to pick up the thread from Tanya, I think the theme of 2021 was a combination of, well, in a word, resilience. This year tested everybody's resilience more so, even after a year of 2020 where people thought, next year better not be like this year. Well, it wasn't. It was worse in many dimensions that Tanya's already discussed. However, I think there's been a really impressive and heartening demonstration of resilience among the people running the businesses under difficult conditions in terms of the hospitality side and the growing side. If, to dive in a little bit more just from the conversations I've had around the Valley this fall during harvest, although I tried to leave most people alone during the peak of their time out in the vineyards. But since then, now that things are settling into ferments, and I hope those are going well for everybody, that that small crop. So ripeness of fruit, some smoke, noticeable in really only in the pockets where the big fires that were mostly to the west of us, quite frankly, and a little bit to the south would sort of drift in and hang for a few days. But by and large, I mean, it was not a blanket. And even, 3-4 years ago in Vancouver, where we had, the smoke would come down from the interior or up from Washington State, and we would just be sitting under this blanket, very depressing blanket for days and weeks. Most of the Valley didn't experience that. There were clear patches, and so I think what we're learning about smoke taint is we're only going to learn more after the fact once the wines are in bottle, which can be very difficult, of course, to address. But my sense is a lot of winemakers are pretty satisfied with their quality of fruit. But I had a meeting yesterday with two of them who kindly were able to step aside from their cellars for an hour or so. And they said exactly the same thing. We just wish we had more. So the 2021 vintage is going to be small, probably quite ripe, as Tanya points out. And so I think the quality is going to be there. I don't know if of the wines that have that are allocated to blends or to, specialty products. I have some bubble going on here. It'll be interesting to see, how much of the various styles of wine, especially, of course, rosé is a good example of. So it's going to be interesting to see what winemakers decide to do with the smaller volume they have and where they're going to allocate that juice and finished wine and what products they're going to see. But consumers, if this is going to be hopefully, Mike, widely viewed by your Overcast audience, I would say, keep a close eye on the wines that you love coming out of, especially the Okanagan Valley and Similkameen Valley. Grab them while you can for 2021 when they come out in the next couple of years.
Which reminds me, you raised your glass for people who are watching this on YouTube. What's in your glass? I didn't ask you, Tanya. We'll come back to you and we'll get to know what's in your glass. But what's in your glass right now?
Okay, so I have this rolled through the door just a few hours ago, actually. So Red Rooster's Brut, and it's NV. So I don't know exactly when it was produced, but on their website, their tasting notes are apply to a fresh young wine. They say traditional method. It is Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And it is enthusiastic and effervescent. There's lots of bubbles going on here. It is definitely refreshing. And to the extent that BC is developing a sparkling wine identity and style, and I gather those grapes were coming in starting in August this year, that I'm an acid hound. There's good Mark Hicken, there's good acidity on this wine, let me tell you.
Fantastic. I'll maybe just mention that I'm sipping right now a Sauvignon Blanc Semillon from Mark Hicken, Siren's Call 2020. I went over to Mark's place last night. Mark is a BC winemaker and got
Mark
his
Simpson,
take.
you mean?
Mark Simpson. Sorry, did I say Mark Hicken? Okay. Mark Hicken. Mark Hicken is a man of many talents, but not winemaking. And I asked Mark about smoke, and he had some interesting, very many thoughts about what was happening out there. And he said in a particular vineyard, the Petit Verdot had what he determined was some smoke taint, but the Malbec didn't. And I said, it's because the skins were thicker on the Petit Verdot, and he said actually it was just it was opposite. It was like it wasn't due to skin thickness. It was just a completely random experience out there. Mark, we've seen this industry hit some choppy seas just over the last couple of years with the pandemic, and now with all of these weather events. What's your take on how things are going right now in the sector? Having been out there talking to people in the business right now, I'm sure the outlook is still good, but there are many challenges out there.
Yeah. Again, yeah. Thanks, Mike, for putting this together. Definitely, I see a lot of positivity and a lot of resilience again in the wine industry here. Definitely, and people have already mentioned this, that I think the real challenges on the production and business side that I'm hearing about this year stem from the crop, the crop load and the fact that we had a really light crop. Yields were really down, and for some wineries down really dramatically. So that causes some significant problems for the winery. First of all, some of the wineries have told me they're expecting to run out of wine by early next season, especially during the tourist season and tasting room season. So that's obviously a big concern for them in terms of revenue and cash flow. And it's also particularly, I think, I've seen a real effect on grape prices. We've had a bit of an issue in terms of grape shortages and demand for the last couple of years, and this year particularly seeing really high grape prices. One of somebody just emailed me the other day and said they were paying $4,500 a ton for sort of premium red varieties. That's pretty high historically for BC, and I think it's going to cause some upward pressure on pricing, because there's kind of a metric in the North American wine industry that wine price, the retail price of the bottle should be about should be 100 times less than the ton price. So if you're paying $4,500 a ton, the price for the bottle should be about $45, but that's significantly higher than the average retail prices. So, I think there's going to be some real business pressure from the grape shortages and the light crop, and also labor shortages. Hearing a lot about that, and some of the wineries unable to operate restaurants, for example, 7 days a week. Again, having an effect on revenue and cash flow. So the double whammy that I've been hearing about is the crop shortages and labor shortages.
And what's in your glass, Mark?
This is actually, France is on my mind today. So this is actually a bottle of French wine. It's Chapoutier Les Maisonniers. It's Crozes Hermitage, so Syrah from France. And France is on my mind because my eldest son is going on an exchange to Paris in January, and I'm trying to get him a visa to. So I'm hoping that by drinking some French wine, it'll bring me some good karma at the French consulate, and they'll issue the visa quickly.
Okay, well, I'll make sure that I tweet to them or something with the podcast, and they'll see you on there and fast track that visa. Harry, we've seen the National Wine Awards, the Wine Line Awards. I know you've been following a little bit of what's going on with the industry. Both you and Karen, you brought this up a little bit earlier on. We saw some well-known BC wineries that perhaps have been a little bit below the radar, I would say, lately. And I don't to say that they're not very busy, but wineries that have been around for a long time are I think energized by this kind of notice. And one of them was Blasted Church, for example, which is to my understanding, gone through some ownership changes in the last little, including a new winemaker. But what do you think about some of the recognition that we have seen given to the BC industry and Canada as a whole? Any sort of thoughts on that?
One of the things that I really like about the National Wine Awards is that they profile like the top 25 small wineries. And so when you look at the list of small wineries, it kind of rotates around. Lake Breeze, Road 13, and this year La Friends, almost out of nowhere. So I think they've always done a good job of highlighting the small guys. And when you compare British Columbia to Ontario, one of the things there are more wineries in British Columbia. There are more, it's more of an estate type of approach. In terms of acreage, even though there's way more wineries in BC than Ontario, the acreage is way greater in Ontario. They have 17,000 acres, where in BC is 11,000. So in some ways, the Ontario grape production system, they're more into grape production. We're a little bit more wine focused. And so even though we have more wineries, they tend to be smaller producers. And we're on the West Coast, along with powerhouses like Washington, Oregon, California. I mean, the Okanagan is an amazing place to grow grapes, but it's not just in the Okanagan. I think there's more and more recognition for the other regions. We take such pride in British Columbia wines, but sometimes it's just a little bit always Okanagan focused. Rathjen Cellars got a platinum for their Pinot Noir. And that is a winery on the Saanich Peninsula. And all the grapes in that Pinot Noir, I believe, are from the Saanich Peninsula, which is unthinkable that a Pinot Noir from Vancouver Island would get a platinum, like if you look at 5-10 years ago. And I'm enjoying Vancouver Island wines partly because they are so different than Okanagan wines. They're not as ripe, lower alcohol, a little more of a briny sense, a little more saltiness. Some of the wines from Nova Scotia, like Lightfoot and Wolfville, they do some amazing Pinot Noirs and Chardonnays as well. And it is, but a lighter style. And one of the things that I noticed that David Lawrason focused on the National Wine Awards is proportionately to the number of entries. The awards are given fairly equitably from BC, Ontario, and I even looked at also Nova Scotia. Half the entries got medals. So
Yeah,
I'm
thought
glad
that
that there's a
analysis
national
was
approach.
really enlightening, Harry. Yeah, I thought the same. It's like I've had heard from a few people around the Okanagan saying, well, you know, BC swept the floor. When you interpret it the way that David laid it out in, for anybody watching, it is on Wine Alliance website. It's one of David's posts just from, I think, last day or two, where he itemized how many wineries submitted wines and which wine, how many medaled, and the provincial proportion is quite balanced between, especially between BC and Ontario. So yeah, I agree with you, Harry. I think that that's actually really worth taking note of, because it's not just a BC story at all.
I'll make sure that all of the links that you're talking about, by the way, are in the show notes. Harry, you wanted to add some more?
Yeah, I think one of the big stories in my mind that really is different is the category of sparkling wine. When I talked to producers 10 years ago saying, look, we live in Canada, we have marginal grape production. We could produce high quality, high acid wines. They said, oh, my bank won't let me. The amount of capital investment to produce sparkling wines is just not a viable business option. And because when you're going to the world, it's sometimes hard to say, oh, I have a fantastic Canadian Merlot or a fantastic Okanagan Chardonnay. And Okanagan Chardonnays did of medals that went to sparkling wines. And I think the world, it's like, Canada Dry ginger ale. I think the world, the whole idea, like ice wine from Canada, sure. Refreshing, sparkling wines from Canada, absolutely. An amazing amount of medals did not exist a few years ago. In fact, in 2017, when Canada was a theme of the Vancouver International Wine Festival, there wasn't that much sparkling wine from Canada, even 2017. And talking to a lot of producers, you guys should be making more sparkling wine. No. But Gordon Fitzpatrick, when you look at what he's done at Fitzpatrick and the amount of investment he's put in the cellars, I'm just so, I think it's fantastic that the amount of investment in sparkling wine. It's going to allow the grape vineyard, the acreage to get larger because it's going to allow us to grow more grapes into sparkling wine production. And the other thing is the Canadian Brett. I don't know if that's a term, but we're going to have to deal with it, which is the smoke taint. And it's going to be part of, I guess it's part of the terroir, it's part of the production, and some of it doesn't creep into the wine until it's bottled. So this is going to be a really interesting next couple of years, which vintages, which producers have that style, and a little bit maybe enhances the wine, but too much, not so much. It's going to be, and the judges pointed that out, more and more smoke taint, even at the national awards. And some of them got medals.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I was just going to add one little comment. I've actually had a couple of winery principals kind of mention that. And they politely are saying, I mean, this is going to be a bad play on words, but they are almost resigned to it being endemic in wine production in the coming years. So, and then, yeah, on the topic of sparkling, Harry, I was also just going to add, I think that the addition of sparkling to the roster also allows for more breadth in and better actually distribution of risk in off years, right? Because you can make a sparkling in a cooler year, you can more or less make it in a warmer year when you harvest earlier. So I think you're right. I think it's a great addition to BC production, and by and large, the prices are remaining really reasonable.
Yeah, it's comparable to Cremant from France, and sparkling from California when it's imported in. I mean, it's hard to compete with prices when you're in California, but here in our market, I think $25 gets you low. We're competitors.
Harry, I'm very glad that you drew the straight line between Canada Dry and Bubble in Canada.
You know what?
I love it.
It's true.
It's
you look
the
at
great
that
brand,
map,
the great
Canada
software.
Dry.
Yeah. And so, Harry, tell us what's in your glass before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah, my Vinispheric River tonight is a Riesling from Narrative by Okanagan Crush Pad. And picked this up in the Okanagan a few weeks ago. And it's made in concrete tanks. And so it has that textural feel that Okanagan Crush Pad is kind of going for. It's not kind of the high acid lime style. I would say it's a little bit more of the round apricot. It's 10.5% alcohol. So that kind of made me think it was going to be a bit sweet, but it's a little bit off dry. Kind of reminds me of a kind of a German Rheingau more than a German Mosel, which is more kind of laser focused. This is round and juicy, and it's got a little bit of savory notes, very, very apricot. Usually I find Okanagan Riesling's a little bit more in the kind of juicy, fruity, peachy. This has got some savory complexity to it, and some kind of peach skin and apricot skin. It's got a little just tinge of bitterness to it that just makes it really appetizing.
So we're not doing this on TikTok today, and which is so moving our focus a little bit towards younger generation. It'll be we do have perhaps some generational breadth on today's call, but I'm going to maybe start with Tanya to talk a little bit about some recent reports that we're hearing about, research showing that the wine consumer is not coming out of the younger generation. Is that something that you perceive either happening or as a concern for the producers of wine that you've been dealing with?
Great question. I've heard more about that, I would say, on global commentary about the American market recently, based on consumer data that has been collected there. It's a much larger market, and also perhaps in Europe. I'm not saying that I'm not hearing that in British Columbia. What I hear more about are things like caloric content or level of alcohol or packaging materials, sustainability, carbon footprint. Sometimes you hear that the younger generations aren't off wine, but they're buying less. They're conscious consumers in general terms. And so they may spend more on less wine or other products. But certainly there's been a rise in RTD, ready to drink, cocktails, canned stuff is huge. So anecdotally, I've seen the rise in all of the canned drinks, but to be honest, I've seen that across all age spectrums, especially in the summer. You throw your can onto your boat or in your backpack, you're going for a walk. So I don't have enough of my immediate anecdotal data that would support that position, but the other things I mentioned are what I hear more about, for sure.
And what's in your glass? I didn't get to ask you earlier.
Thank you. And this was not planned. This comes right off of the back of Harry's comments. So I have a white blend from a winery called Kutatash. Kutatash is based on Salt Spring Island. The owners and vintners are named Mira Touche and Daniel Dragart. Like Mike Rathjen, that Harry referred to with the Platinum Pinot Noir, they're part of what I'd call a new wave of coastal vintners who are really taking the approach of farming sustainably and farming grapes in Vancouver Island or on the Wine Islands, the South Gulf Islands, being stewards of the land and making wines which are textured and coastal and work well on the coast. So the one I'm drinking, and they make a beautiful Pinot Noir, also based from an Epicure vineyard on the Saanich Peninsula, Pat Bay, right by the Victoria Airport, for those familiar. And I normally sip on their wine, but that wine, the Pinot Noir. But today I grabbed from my locker one of their white blends I got last time I visited them. And this one actually is a blend of Madeleine Angevine and Reichensteiner, which are pretty esoteric. They just have a few rows of them on their home block in Salt Spring Island. So I just wanted to try it. And it is a lovely wine. I hadn't tried this one before. It's got some beautiful depth. It's got some floral, some stone fruit, nicely balanced, a touch of salinity that Harry mentioned to remind us it's made on the coast. And I don't know about the vinification on this one, but I know that the winery often uses things like carbonic maceration to bring a texture and a depth in addition to maybe some neutral oak. So that's what I'm calling it. It's called Viz or Viz, V-I-Z, and I'm really enjoying it.
I love the fact that we're talking about the, they call them emerging regions, but let's face it, they're tougher places to grow grapes. They're sometimes vinifera does not take there, but there are some lovely sort of microclimates that exist in these places. I was over in Vancouver Island to run the Victoria Half Marathon, and the first thing that Stacy and I did was headed out to the Strath, which really disappointed me. I'm sorry, guys. You guys used to have the most fantastic rack of all the best of Vancouver Island, and I went in there, and I guess for some, I don't know, COVID reason, that they took the rack out, and their selection was way back. But I was looking for some of the alderley and the blue grouse and the Averill Creek and Zanata. You know, they had a few selections there, but in Unsworth, you know, there's some really lovely wines happening on the island. I also noticed when I was looking at the National Wine Awards that there were 3 submissions from New Brunswick, which I thought was kind of cool, and Quebec, and of course Nova Scotia, which is really standing tall too. I just love to see these emerging regions kind of putting their own stamp on the wine world.
Mike, if it's okay, I was just going to add, like, that's a perfect segue. I was going to pick up a little bit of the thread that Tanya was mentioning around wine consumption and younger generations, dare we say, millennials, Gen Z. And I think, so a couple of things I wanted to mention, but I'll pick up your thread, Mike, first. I actually think that this makes a tremendous opportunity for emerging wine regions, because my sense is, you know, sort of not to put the Okanagan, because this is more or less a BC podcast, but not to put the Okanagan in the context of being overly established and boring, far from it. But I think that some of the really interesting things that are going on in the other places that you've both just mentioned actually present a real opportunity to attract younger drinkers and turn them on to, you know, new, cool, interesting, very niche for sure, and with unique flavor profiles. So I was that just struck me. I have no information to back that up, but it sounds like that there's a real niche opportunity there to create a following and build on a following.
I think too, well, in terms of consumer behavior, at least what I've read and maybe what I've witnessed, is that whole idea about the experiential aspects of wine and wine travel and wine exploring, and whether you're doing it virtually or you're able to hit the land. And certainly, Karen, I think there is a huge opportunity for that. People want to go on an adventure. They want to learn. They may be drinking less, but they still want to learn. I mean, there's a place for, I'm just going to grab a cold one and this is what it's for. I'm out with my friends, going to have some cocktails or beverage or a glass of wine. But I think that there is that sense in the segment of the market, the younger market, where they want to learn and they want to go on an adventure. And I think in British Columbia broadly, huge part of our potential here is, given especially our small production, is when people can travel again, is really the travel experience, the adventure around the wine and the culinary adventure and all of the offshoots of services and businesses that can flow from that. And people want to,
it's kind of the craft identity, right? Yeah, like I think that's alive and well. So yeah. The other thing I was going to mention, which Tanya, you've just referenced, and that is the so the UBC Okanagan participated in, I think, a wider study. I can't remember if I circulated it to all of you, but it's on to some extent how to recapture and appeal to millennial, Gen Z, younger generation of wine drinkers. And the nub of it, Mike, if you want, you can post this later as the link, I can send it to you. But the nub of it, I think UBCO participated in this piece of research, and that is that the way we've all been educated and trained on really the technical evaluative approach to wine appreciation needs to some extent be stood on its head, and it's around experiential, and it's around telling the story of the emotive impact that wine can have on all of us. I mean, that's certainly why I'm here, and that's certainly why, you know, what keeps, I think, us all excited. And so it was just interesting that this research was suggesting that, you know, wineries really should focus on maybe a bit of a shift, depending on where they're already at, but in terms of making sure that they're telling the story and turning people on, a little bit more of that and a little bit less technical and walking people through the the steps, and which is obviously more rigid and quite a bit more about what is right and what is wrong. But it seems like that, let's ditch that a little bit in favor of and I'm in favor of this, just enjoying and appreciating. That's what it's for. That's why people make wine in the first place. It's capturing the spirit, I think, quite well.
Just sort of picking up on that experiential part of it. I know that our attraction, Stacy and I, when we first started wine traveling, it was about the relationships that we would build with all these people, and here we are today. We all have these great people we're connected to. Mark, if I think about the where the business is going, it's been heavily capitalized. We've got a lot of people, a lot of money, but we still have some really cool small players that are doing kind of niche business. I'm thinking, for example, Rob and Michelle over at Black Market Wine Company over in Caledon. They're doing something very cool. We've got Penelope and Dylan doing Roche Winery on Armada Bench. I mean, those guys are putting everything they've got into the wine business there, and still making it work, and people are sort of flocking to them. Tell me there's hope for this sector in the sense that it doesn't always have to be about the bottom line, even when we're sort of buying grapes at $4,500 a ton, which is a lot of money.
Well, it's funny, like a lot of other regions have, we're a young region, and many other regions have gone through what we have gone through. I mean, the closest comparison would probably be Washington State. And Washington State, is a much larger region now than BC, but it went through a lot of the same different stages. And there was one stage in Washington where there was a lot of consolidation of smaller wineries, but it was kind of interesting because I think excitement kind of builds around the wine region. And even when there's consolidation, it actually doesn't really seem to slow down the number of wineries, because there always seems to be, because the excitement builds and the enthusiasm builds and the wine quality starts getting better and better, you still tend to have a lot of smaller players, particularly, rushing into the space and doing some really interesting, exciting things. And quite frequently, those smaller players can be the ones that actually create even greater spotlight on the region. I mean, in Washington, certainly the history bore that out. You had some small wineries that ended up getting significant international attention and really elevating the international spotlight onto those regions. And I think the same thing will likely happen here. I mean, we've been seeing a bit of consolidation in the industry here, and we've been seeing some wineries being bought up by larger players. One particularly, new kind of large players entered the market, but I don't think it'll stop the innovation and the focus on quality for the small producers. I think that's going to continue, and I think you are likely to see some of the most exciting, most interesting wines coming from those small producers.
I've when I've been up in the Okanagan and looked up close, you do have the large established players that have been there from the Quails Gates and the families that have been there for a long time, and then you've got some of the new players, Dennis O'Rourke, for example, up in Lake Country, building tunnels, and I even was quite impressed by Mount Boucheries' reemergence with new ownership, and the fact that they built an absolutely beautiful facility. They put a lot of effort into reviving their wine program. So there are, even though there are people who are bringing in a lot of investments into the sector, we're seeing a lot of improvement in the experience. Although at times, we do kind of wonder how sustainable that is when the cost of grapes starts going up that high. So I thought maybe we would shift gears a little bit. And Harry, you've benefited us with the backdrop from, we remember when France was the theme region. You were able to get the wine festival back in 2022. And so we're kind of excited to hear about it. Maybe tell us a little bit about what it took to get the festival restarted and what we should expect You have the floor.
Behind me is the tasting room, probably February 29th, 2020, if you remember, just a couple of weeks before the pandemic struck. 25,000 people attended the festival. We were having a great time with France as a theme, and we were gearing up to have South America as our theme continent, our first theme continent in 2021. So really, I view 2022 as a stepping stone to 2023. We're not doing a theme country, theme region in 2022. We're excited to be able to do South America in 2023. So really, we're just entering the application process to determine which wineries, what wines we have to work with, because the wines are really the content of the festival. I'm expecting the 2022 vintage to be a little smaller, but very ripe. So I think the quality will be very good. Picking up on what Karen was saying about the vintage, I think festivals do have vintages. I think just from a behind the scenes thing, one of the challenges, you can't predict option A, B, C, D, what is actually going to happen. So you got to make sure your car, your vehicle that you're traveling in, especially with, these crises, you got to make sure you have enough water, enough gas, that your car's tuned up, that people are healthy so you can withstand these kind of pressures. And, on one hand, you have to afford the monthly overhead. And on the other hand, because you can't predict what's going to happen, you have to kind of do this financial dance where the revenue that you get from the festival has to be matched with the expenses. So even if you're getting ticket revenue and other revenue, you can't spend that money because you don't know what's going to happen. And you have to work with suppliers where you can say, you know what, I can't give you a deposit but I need you to have a trust that we're going to do this together. And if something goes wrong, we need to be able to reschedule because we've got all this wine committed. So when you think of all the permutations in the fork in the road that we might be faced, the key is not to spend the event revenue before the event is successfully concluded. And so that's the challenge. I'm confident that it'll be a good show, whatever the show that we're allowed to have. We've reached out to agents. We've got lots of people interested in participating. Glad to see the Victoria International Wine Festival up and running. Cornucopia didn't get canceled. There has not been a wine show yet in the world as big as the one behind me, has not taken place since March 1st, 2020. So it's not going to be as big, but the average person only goes to 2 events. So as long as the wines that they have, the experience they have, it's going to be a small vintage, very ripe, but high quality.
And I know
very resilient, capital R resilient.
Oh, there's an R. There it is. Yes, resilience.
And I know you've had.
It's a British Columbia thing, right? It's a BC thing.
We're learning how to do it on the fly.
I know you've had the help and support of Karen and Mark, who are on your board of directors, but tell us where it's going to be and what the dates are, and maybe give us an idea of what we can expect or when we can start seeing ticket sales start happening if they haven't already.
We'll have some announcements probably starting in January. The dates are May 16th to 22nd. We're very fortunate that the convention center was able to reschedule us from our usual place at the end of February. So glad we're not at the end of February. The supply chain issues and stuff. As soon as they said, the festival end of February, we might have to grab stock from Christmas. Like, oh no, don't mess with the Christmas stock. That's profit for the industry. But it's going to be in the middle of May, 16th to 22nd. Capacity events, like the tasting, was probably be capped at 50%. We're going to ask for less wine from the wineries. So there's going to never be as much elbow room as there is at the upcoming wine festival. So, maybe rather than be able to choose from 2 or 3 seminars at the same time, there just might be 1 seminar. But you can't go to 3 seminars at the same time unless you're Karen or Mark or Tanya, but the ticket buyer can only go to 1 event at one time. We'll see what announcements we have in January. vanwinefest.ca is the information. It's going to be an exciting, journey. There's going to be a story. Wine is all about stories. This festival will have a story to it. We don't know what it's going to be, and I think that's exciting. And it'll be, it's going to be very, very interesting, resilient, and it's going to be a ride that, as a province and a city, we're going to do together.
I
Wine
think one of the, oh, sorry, Mike, I was just going to add, one of the super cool things, and we discussed this, I think, with a few of us over the past month or so, and certainly hearing from the agents that their producers are keen to get back on the road. They have had an 18 to 20 month break. Not that this hasn't roiled, the wine world in a major way, but I'm sensing and hearing on the ground that there's a lot of interest in travel, and so wineries are keen to get back out there. And while I know considerably less than Harry does about what the art of the possible is, it just seems to me that the 2022 festival is really a wide open space and a wide open opportunity to hopefully there's some producers out there in cool parts of the world that are keen to land in Vancouver. And I just think that there's a pent up energy out there that is that I hope a bunch of that is directed to Vancouver, because I think there's an unprecedented opportunity for some very interesting wineries to make an appearance here this year and next year and going forward.
Wine has been with us for thousands of years, and it has been through some pretty tumultuous times. And I will, Harry, let's raise a glass to Van Wine Fest 2022 and to our Wine Roundtable. I appreciate all of you deciding to come on the podcast today, and I very much look forward to future conversations and future glasses of wine and getting back together in person like we did back in July, except for Mark, who's I think was having a wedding anniversary, and we couldn't convince Connie to join us that night. So at any rate, thank you very much. I appreciate you. We'll be together soon, and all the very best, and cheers to all of you.
Cheers. Thanks,
Cheers,
Mike.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
And there you have it, episode 15 of Vancouver Overcast with Mike Klassen. I want to thank you, our listeners of the podcast and viewers on YouTube, for tuning in, liking, sharing, and subscribing. If you like this regular check-in with these interesting guests, please let others know about Vancouver Overcast with Mike Klassen and invite them to visit www.overcastyvr.ca. And if you want to support more content like this, visit patreon.com/overcastyvr. You can make a small contribution there, and it'll go a long way to making sure that the podcast continues. A big thank you to the Wine Roundtable for their insights, Harry Hercheg, Executive Director at the Vancouver International Wine Festival, Karen Graham, founder of Wine Drops, Mark Hicken from TTGV, and the always delightful Tanya Tomaszewska, also from TTGV. Thanks. See you next time.